Well, if you survived last week with a usable tight end score, congratulations, because you're one of the few. With only 5 tight ends cracking double digits last week, we're officially in that late season stretch where the gap between the top tier and everybody else is massive. So here's how the tight end position shakes out for week 12. What's up, Headliner Nation? My name is Brad, the Rankings King, and before we dive into this week's rankings, just a reminder that these are the consensus rankings from the Headliners team. And for more detailed analysis, check out those start-sit videos from Kyle already posted this week. If you want even more breakdowns each week, join the Fantasy Headliners community by hitting that join button below. It's going to get you access to extra rankings like flex, kicker, defense, and a spot inside of our Discord. Now, before we dive into week 12, we have a few hits and misses from last week. We'll start with our trio of hits, and that's Trey McBride, George Kittle, and Travis Kelce. And there were only 5 tight ends that scored at least 10 fantasy points in week 11. And so am I supposed to say that we actually hit on McBride, Kittle, and Kelce? Because, I mean, it's pretty obvious. And then what about the misses? And we look at Oronde Gadsden and Dallas Goedert. Basically, every tight end outside of the top 5 was a miss. But the biggest misses we may have had were Dallas Goedert and Oronde Gadsden. They just completely disappeared in week 11. All right, so let's put that behind us and let's hope for better things here in week 12. We'll start in tier 1. We've got Trey McBride, George Kittle, Travis Kelce, Brock Bowers, Tyler Warren. And at number 1, we've got Trey McBride, and he's the overall tight end 1 on the season, and he scored 35 points more than the next closest tight end on the year. He's now had 14 plus points in 5 straight games and has a matchup against Jacksonville, who allows the second most fantasy points per game to tight ends. At number 2, we have George Kittle, and since returning from injury, Kittle has scored 12 plus fantasy points in 3 of his last 4 games. He's a top option for Brock Purdy, and Carolina allows over 12 fantasy points per game to the tight end position. At number 3, we have Travis Kelce, and old man Kelce remains one of the hottest tight ends in football. He's not losing targets to all the wide receiver options, and he's scored 10 plus points in 3 straight games. Now he faces Indy, who allows the 4th most fantasy points per game to tight ends, so yeah, he should be ready for it. At number 4, we've got Brock Bowers, and the way that Bowers started the game in week 11, I thought that we were on pace for another 40-piece. Unfortunately, the offense dwindled in Vegas, and now he has to deal with a difficult matchup going up against Cleveland. And at number 5, we've got Tyler Warren, and he's the overall tight end 3 on this season and has only 3 points less than Travis Kelce. He's a locked-in weekly starter, but his matchup this week against KC is not going to be an easy one. The KC defense is just playing really well right now. All right, that's it for tier 1. And before we head into the next tier, I want to make sure that you're all set up on Underdog. You already know that we've been crushing those player pick'ems on Underdog this year. So what are you waiting for? Head over to Underdog Fantasy or download the app and create a new account using the referral code Headliners when you do so. Then just make your initial deposit and come join a contest. And if you sign up with that promo code, again, it's Headliners, you'll get access to all of the promos that Underdog offers weekly. And check this out. Once you play your first $5, they're going to give you $100 in bonus funds. So you play 5, you get 100. It's that easy. And don't forget, Jake is going to be breaking down the best picks weekly in our show on Fridays. It's loaded with good picks. And so links to join are in the description. And we look forward to playing with you this week on Underdog. All right, baby, let's turn the page to tier 2. We have Hunter Henry, Dallas Goedert, Jake Ferguson, Kyle Pitts, Mark Andrews, and Jawan Johnson. At number 6, we have Hunter Henry, and it's now at that point of the rankings warning where everything is a crapshoot. Henry's volume isn't great, but the matchup against Cincinnati is. There is no team in the NFL that allows more fantasy points per game to tight ends than the Bengals, and it's not even close. At number 7, we have Dallas Goedert, and we would love to have him higher, but the dude has barely had 100 yards receiving over his last 4 games combined. The matchup against Dallas isn't horrible, though, but that defense looked better in week 11, and so he remains pretty touchdown dependent as it comes to tight ends. At number 8, we have Jake Ferguson, and after a hot start to the season, similar to Goddard, Ferguson barely has 100 yards total over his last 4 games combined. The return of CeeDee Lamb has made Ferguson nothing more than a touchdown-dependent tight end like Dallas Goedert. At number 9, we have Kyle Pitts, and with the injury to Drake London, you would think that Kyle Pitts is in line for massive volume, but then you see Kirk Cousins as a quarterback, and you immediately lose faith in a potential late-season breakout for Kyle Pitts. At number 10, we have Mark Andrews, and we've known for multiple years, and it's well documented on this channel, that Andrews needs a touchdown to be startable in fantasy football. But I don't know if we can count on a 35-yard rushing touchdown each week. Luckily, his matchup this week is a decent one against the Jets. At number 11, we have Juwan Johnson, and all for the bye in his best game of the year. And with Rashid Shaheed gone, we should continue to see targets and touchdown chances for Johnson. Unfortunately, Atlanta allows the third fewest fantasy points per game to opposing tight ends, so this will not be an easy one. All right, that's tier 2. Let's turn the page to tier 3. We have Cade Otton, AJ Barner, Dalton Schultz, and Theo Johnson. At 12, we have Cade Otton, and Cade ran into that tough Buffalo defense last week, but he once again had 5 targets in his 6th straight game. Now he gets a matchup against the Rams, who were torched by AJ Barner in week 11. Speaking of AJ Barner, we've got him at number 13, and Barner bounced back with a huge game in week 11. He saw a season high in targets and receptions, and he'd really become an afterthought in this offense, but hopefully he can return to that 5 to 7 weekly target range moving forward. At number 14, we have Dalton Schultz, and Schultz has continued to be one of the most consistent tight ends, whether it be Stroud or Mills at quarterback. Unfortunately, he runs into a matchup against Buffalo this week, who allows less than 5 fantasy points per game to tight ends. And if Jackson Dart returns in week 12, we could once again see Johnson hover around 6 targets. It's not an easy matchup against Detroit, but they're going to have to throw to have a chance at winning. So there you go. There's your top 15 in tiers 1, 2, and 3. And I know it gets a little ugly there at the bottom when we've got a couple guys on the outside looking in with Colson Loveland, Harold Fannin Jr., David Njoku, TJ Hawkinson, and Mason Taylor. And that's how the tight end landscape looks heading into week 12. And every point matters as we approach the fantasy playoffs. So hit that like button, subscribe, and leave your questions in the comments. Let's go get a W this week, Headliner Nation.
Analytics, off the chain, off the channel.